public. Now, this comes after the recent Concord ruling. And tonight on Interface, we ask whether churches should actively be involved in socio-political development or in what's happening in the country. And we're going to be talking not just about churches, but also about all religious organizations. And our guest this evening are Dr. Matole Moteja, who is from the National Interfaith Council of South Africa, and also Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, who is the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. As always on this show, if you would like to take part, we welcome your views on our social media pages. On Facebook, you can find us at Interface on SABC, or on Twitter at Interface on SABC or at Tembisa Magele. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having us.
So I just want to open with a statement that was made by Archbishop Desmond Tutu a few years back, where he said, when people say churches should not get involved in politics, I ask them what Bible they are reading. Now, I know tonight we're not talking just about the Christian church, but we're talking about all religious organizations. And the question, as we've posed in the intro, is, should you, as members of religious organizations, be involved at all in politics in particular? Bishop?
Well, we have a psalm that says, the earth is the Lord's and everything that there is in it. Human life is managed through politics, but human life is God's. Definitely, religious organizations have to have a say in bringing the kind of values that make for the good life. But the other question might well be, should politicians seek to manage and manipulate religious organizations?
Explain that.
Well, there's a beautiful statement from Napoleon, who was dealing with the French issue of the changes since the French Revolution. And he says something like, skillful conquerors have not got entangled with priests, but they can both contain them and use them. And that's what skillful politicians try to do. They just use religion. Right. When it suits them. I mean, we had this strong statement from John Foster and P.W. Botha, working his finger. The church must not get involved. And yet they needed religious legitimation for apartheid.
We're going to talk a little bit about what the church's role and religious organizations' role was in apartheid. But do you agree with that sentiment, that religious organizations and churches in particular should get involved in politics?
My belief is that all human beings have spiritual and material interests. Now, politics deal with the material interests of the people. But how they deal with these material interests must also be informed by their spiritual interests. So you cannot compartmentalize the two, because we have to look at a human being as holistically. A human being has spiritual and material interests, and therefore believers of whatever kind cannot divorce themselves from the politics of any country.
Right, but where do you draw the line in light of what you've just said about the chance of getting manipulated? Where is that line where you say, now we know we are being manipulated, or now we're actually doing what is our role in society and to represent the people that we lead? Where's that line, Bishop?
This is exactly the whole domain of the social ethics, how you're making the distinction of the nature of your engagement. All rulers throughout the ages, all centuries, have always, as I said, wanted to have religious legitimation. At the same time, religious, or rather the voices of the divine, have always tried to bring certain value systems to rulers in order to curb their excesses. You know the story of Elijah and Ahab, the husband of Jezebel, who came and said, that's not the way it ought to be done. But you know what? Ahab had 400 prophets, what are called court prophets. These are the religious figures that he manipulates. And Elijah was by himself. But he stood up for the truth because those were certain values that he was trying to bring to bear. So it is always a tension between what is right and wrong. And I think if you understand the line of what is right and wrong, the religious people know when they are crossing that line.
But let me play devil's advocate, well, excuse the pun, for a moment here and say maybe that's precisely why religious organizations should not get involved in politics, because you're dealing with fallible human beings. You're dealing with people that are likely to be swayed one way or the other. And so the best way is to steer clear of that domain altogether, wouldn't you say?
I would not agree, because you see, in spiritual humanism,
yes,
we talk about light, life, and love. And in secular humanism, we talk about freedom, equality, and justice. Now, it is the same principles, but expressed differently. In fact, the foundation of our human rights culture, say freedom, equality, and justice, derived from the spiritual humanism. It's just a question that when we come to real life, other interests develop where politicians may want to hijack religion, and some religion may want to influence politics into a certain direction. So we need to get a balance, but the two need each other.
I'm thinking come election time, look at what's happening in the United States, where you will find political players going to the churches, going to the mosques, going to the temples at a time of elections to say, we're just coming to share in the goodwill of the people. Meanwhile, there is a very clear agenda that there are votes that are at stake here. How do you, as religious organizations, sidestep that particular hole?
I'll start off by saying you keep using the expression whether religious or churches should be involved in politics. I think the answer is no, not in politics, but in life. Politics is simply a system of managing life. And I'm therefore saying churches will not be necessarily involved in politics, but they'll be involved in the life that politics is seeking to manage.
But understanding politics as the general ordinary person would, that, can people who are very strong in the religious domain participate by, for example, being members of particular parties? Can they, stand for office? Can they talk about the parties that they're affiliated to within the religious settings?
Specific example, in 1991, the Synod of Anglican Bishops passed a resolution that said no priest may be a member of a political party. We took issue with them. I did. We took issue with them because we were saying all along you had no problem with priests who are white being members of the Progressive Party, the United Party, the National Party. This was not an issue. But once the rest of society is open to have politics that is legal, you're saying priests must not be. And that sounded like the wrong thing to say. And the argument, and I remember having this conversation with Archbishop Desmond Tutu at the time, saying, no, you can't, because we're concerned about the conflict that this would raise, particularly in areas like KwaZulu-Natal, where there was real danger of people being killed, and that the priests could not be, they had to be sort of stand outside of that so that they can be able to minister all sides. I still believe, in fact, that was correct.
I would really, really love to hear what you have to say on this one, Dr. Matsaka, but we have to take a short break. We're back after this.
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
So this is the question we're asking on Interface tonight. Should churches in particular and religious organizations at large be involved in politics and be involved in what's happening in socio-political developments in this country and elsewhere in the world? Do give us your thoughts by finding us on Facebook at Interface on SABC or on Twitter at Tembisa Magele or at Interface on SABC. And before the break, Dr. Motshekga, we wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not even in apartheid times, that was correct to have faith-based organizations and churches participating in the politics.
Maybe what we should be talking about is that all citizens require services, social, economic, from governments. Therefore, they have an interest in governance of their own countries. Mm-hmm. But the manner or form of participation must not be through the church. It must be through political organizations. But the churches must focus on the spiritual development of the people, moral development of the people, and creating a value-centered society. Because if the society is value-centered and driven, even the politics will be the correct politics.
Do you agree then when the South African Council of Churches, based on their moral standpoint, says to the president of the country, you need to step down? Is that the correct path?
You see, our system is based on the will of the people. Now, people in churches or faith-based organizations are part of the people. Now, they are entitled to take positions on social and political issues. So I would have no problem in people taking a position because the political system and how it works may negatively affect their interests, even as church people. For instance, if a dictatorship arises, you can't say to the churches, say nothing, because that dictatorship may affect their well-being. So I don't think, you can have compartments in these matters.
And on your side, Bishop, when you, as the South African Council of Churches, stand up and say, we are calling on the president to resign, are you not in one or other way influencing me as somebody that's sitting in the pew at your church and saying, well, if the bishop, my bishop, is calling on the president to resign, maybe he's making an indication to me that I should vote for a different party?
I don't think so. I think that, I think it's necessary to recognize that, as Dr. Motshekga has said, the churches bring a certain package of values to the social domain. Mm-hmm. And those values are expressed mostly by the official representatives of the church, at least to the public domain. And that is part of the reason why it is better for them to actually stand back from the political fray in terms of actually participating in leading political parties, so that even in terms of elections, they can be able to stand apart and be able to observe us. However, the values themselves are informed by the reality that there is sin in society, which really comes out of selfishness. All societies have this. And we make a distinction between personal sin, something that somebody does by themselves, which ought to change. And I can repent of this myself. But then, if you are a leader, you occasion systemic sin when you create a system that makes the whole of society sinful. And thirdly, that then leads to what we call social sin, where the whole society is now really entangled in sin. And so there's a great responsibility that lies on the heads on the shoulders of leaders, because they not only do they sin personally, but they also allow for systems to develop that are sinful, and the whole of society can then be entangled in sin. And I think this is what the prophet Ezekiel is talking about when he says, if somebody sins and you, as a religious person, fail to tell the person that this is sinful, and then of course they die because of their sin, you are then responsible for that death. And if indeed you have told them and they still refuse to listen, and they die as a result of that, then of course they're held responsible for their death. So there is always going to be a responsibility that we cannot shirk as religious leaders.
Doctor?
The only problem is that religious leaders are like lawyers. There are as many legal opinions as there are religious opinions. And also, you know, where Christ started one church. Today you have thousands of churches. Now it's very difficult to get consensus even amongst religious people as to what would be the right position. Now that's the dilemma that I see. As if I'm president and then the Muslims say this, the Apostolics say this, the Catholics say this, who must I listen to? So this then therefore means the religious leaders must also first seek consensus amongst themselves, because if there are too many truths, it will be difficult to know which one is the right one.
But isn't that where an interfaith council like yours would come into play? Because then the president or the leading party would interface with a council that is representative of different religions. And having said that, let me ask you this. What has been your position then on not only the call that has been made by the SABC, but on the moral standpoint of the president, as it were?
Our position was that we accept the apology of the president, but we cannot pronounce ourselves on whether or not he should be recalled or relinquish office, because we were not fully informed. And that's why we decided that we must ask for a meeting with the top 6 of the ANC.
Which is something that you've done as the SABC.
So we have not had that meeting. But also we decided that we must respect the ANC process of consulting their structures and civil society. So for us, it is premature to take a position. So the only position we could take is that as religious people, we believe in forgiveness. If a person says, I apologize, we have no reason, biblical or otherwise, basis to refuse the apology.
We'll pick up on this very point right after this break. Just stay with us.
News Today takes an in-depth look on news locally, continentally, and globally. We bring the world to your home. We cover all economy news extensively to keep you informed. We are live to break news as and when they happen across the world. We analyze news using experts in all aspects. Make a date with News Today every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m.
So we asked you this question on our Facebook page at Interface on SABC. We asked, should churches be actively involved in socio-political developments in the country? And we had a flurry of responses from you. Aldine Zacharias says, you cannot ignore the teachings of the church, and then when trouble comes, you call on the church for intervention. So yes, they should get involved. And Simpiwe Peter also says, yes, they should, like they did during apartheid. Corruption, cronyism, nepotism, and tribalism are evil, just like apartheid. Kenny Raketse says, everyone who lives and pays taxes in South Africa should have a voice to express their opinions about the government without fear or favor. And on your messages go. Please do keep them coming. We do love reading those. So let's pick up on the point that you were making before the break. Dr. Motshekga, and that was that you believe in forgiveness. The president has apologized. We should forgive and move on. Why is the South African Council of Churches not taking that exact standpoint as a religious organization?
Well, first of all, you need to ask the question, what did the president apologize for? The president's statement of apology comes at the tail end of his statement. And he says he apologizes for frustration and confusion. This is after the rest of his statement has actually said, A, he has always wanted to pay, B, he has not disrespected anyone, and that, in fact, all this he's tried every way he could to make it happen now. The church leaders have been engaging with the president on this matter. I think that should be clear. It is therefore on moral issues rather than even on the law, although the Constitution is a very important thing. Infringement thereof is serious. But the president said to the church leaders in December, I will never pay. And he said to us that even if a judge could send me to jail, I wouldn't pay because I'll be inviting impeachment. Now, if you know that he has said that, and then he tells the public that I've always wanted to pay, you know this is not true. Then the pressure is on you. Do you keep quiet? Because it's almost like if an uncle has abused, let's say, a niece, and says to the niece, if you ever mention it, I'll kill you. And every time the two of them meet, the niece knows she's concealing something, and the other one knows, I've got you. Now, if you're going to have church leaders who have been told by the head of state that he's never going to pay, and then he says to the public that is represented by the same heads of state, I've always intended to pay. The leaders now are living with a moral challenge. Should they actually accept this statement or not? So that's the first thing that was a problem for us. Okay. And the second,
before you get to the second thing, I'd love to get your response on that one, Dr. Motshekga.
I don't know about that discussion and what the president said. My understanding was that he would not pay before a determination is made as to how much. And now Parliament embarked on a process that would lead to that determination. But before that process was finalized, then the matter was before the courts, and therefore he was overtaken by events.
By events. Mm-hmm. Your next point?
Well, see, Dr. Motshekga is a parliamentarian as well. I would get to that.
Yes.
The second point is that the president says he was misled by his lawyers, and that's a fair point. He would have been misled by his lawyers if that's what they said to him. But the question for me is, was this misleading advice syndicated across the system? How come did the legislators' lawyers also come to the same conclusion? How come did the police minister's lawyers also come to the same conclusion? Was this not perhaps syndicated? We suspect it was syndicated. It may be, maybe not true. But if it was indeed genuine position, fine. But if it is collusion, then we ought to be asking the question, why would these lawyers, at such great expense to the state, mislead the president, the legislature, and the government all round? That is a matter that I think we ought to be chasing to say they must be held accountable.
I'm one of those lawyers who believed that the president must not pay because we needed people that are experts on security issues to make a determination. So our position that he should not pay was dependent on the determination by security experts. So it was not an absolute position. So if there was a syndicated thing, we were not part of it.
And now that the president has said that he received incorrect legal advice, do you think that there should be action taken against the legal advisors that were telling him what you told him?
No, you see, that is a matter between him and his legal advisors. I don't know on what basis he says that was a wrong advice. So, and as an individual, like any accused person, he has the right to plead guilty or not guilty. So I can't get into that area. But I'm saying as Parliament, we did not make any mistake. We were entitled to form ad hoc committees to pursue the matter. And at the end, we didn't say the president must not pay. We said that the matter required experts, security experts to deal with. And we left the matter in the hands of the security experts.
Okay, we've got to wrap the conversation
That's a different we. Is now speaking as the politician, which explains why the religious organization Dr. Mucheka represents then says we'll defer to the political process because they're led by politicians. And so that it makes sense. And therefore, and then of course there are further moral issues.
Well, you've just made a statement and he'd like to respond to that.
No. You see, I'm able to wear two caps. When we took the decision as NICSA, I was wearing a religious cap which involves morals and ethics. So I'll never confuse politics and morals. And in fact, my personal politics are informed by morality and ethics.
All right, final words?
Quickly, I still wanted to get back to these moral issues. Thirdly, I gave you two. Thirdly, even if all this 250 million was correct, we would have expected my political leaders with their values to say, not in our name. We cannot afford it because we're dealing with poverty, unemployment, and inequality. What greater model of inequality? A house, private home, 250 million, and a shack. Surely, this is something that really they should have said, no. And finally, it doesn't take the public protector or anybody else to say that a private crawl of cattle is not a security
We've
feature.
run out of time and we cannot overrun. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our program. Unless you've got a 10-seconder.
No. Just to say that processes must come to an end before you pronounce yourself. Their process came to an end, so they were entitled to
And you will wait for yours to come to an end too. Yes, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming through to talk to us in the studio on this matter. Remember, we continue the conversation on our social media pages. From me, Tembisa Mahele, and the team, good night.